domestic violence knows no boundaries. According to the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs, domestic violence among same-sex partners is on the rise. Cityscape's Andrea McCrary takes a look at the barriers that often stand in the way of victims to get help.
Tim is a survivor of domestic violence. That's not his real name. He wants to remain anonymous and asked us to call him Tim for the purpose of this story. Tim is gay, and he says the abuse from his now ex-partner began verbally, but then things turned physical.
I actually was quite amazed because it would be like a light switch, sometimes in public and sometimes and at home. It didn't make any difference.
Tim says he tried to escape the abuse. He changed the locks, but he gave in to his partners crying please from the hallway. Tim says this became a pattern in his relationship.
At the third time, he threatened that if I changed the locks back, he would kill me. And he did try to kill me on two different occasions, once with overdosing on a drug that I was given. And that was an odd thing. And physically.
The National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs releases an annual report on the state of domestic violence in the LGBTQ community nationwide. The latest report shows LGBTQ domestic and intimate partner violence reports have risen by 15% since 2008, and the murder rate associated with domestic violence cases in the LGBTQ community is up 50% since 2007.
What that means is the violence is getting more and more severe. So the lethality or the chances that this violence will be lethal towards someone is the numbers seem to be getting higher and higher. And that's of obvious concern to the local anti-violence programs that are working directly on these issues throughout the country.
That's Sharon Staple, the executive director of the New York City Anti-Violence Project. The group provides services for LGBTQ victims of domestic abuse. She says LGBTQ victims still face challenges in seeking help.
There can be an obstacle just in how someone asks a question or how someone advertises their services or how someone talks about what violence is that makes LGBTQ people think, oh, well, that service doesn't apply to me because I'm not any of those things, and so therefore I can't access that service. That's in addition to the institutionalized discrimination and bias that folks feel very legitimately because the laws of this state have not always included LGBTQ people.
But that changed in New York in 2008. The definition of what types of relationships were recognized in instances of domestic violence was expanded to include same-sex partners. Virginia Goggin is a staff attorney at the LGBT Law Project at the New York Legal Assistance Group, a nonprofit law office that provides free legal services to low-income New Yorkers. Goggin says, though the laws in New York have changed to include LGBTQ people, it doesn't mean the problems they faced were dissolved.
There aren't necessarily barriers in the law, but there are, I guess, cultural competency barriers for either LGBT folks coming into the court feeling comfortable or the court personnel, judges, etc., respecting and treating the parties in an educated way.
Goggin says she hears a lot of stories of police officers responding inappropriately to domestic violence cases involving LGBTQ people.
There are officers who are fabulous, and I think a lot of them have cultural competency training, but I do hear often when people call the police, they come and the response is not as good as it should be. The cops have to come and decide who is the primary aggressor. And because it's a same-sex relationship, oftentimes they just can't figure it out and they can't deal with it.
Kathy Ryan is a chief with the New York City Police Department's Domestic Violence Unit. She says these instances are the exception rather than the rule. Ryan says new recruits are trained to handle diverse instances of domestic violence and to be sensitive to different types of relationships. But she doesn't entirely dismiss the criticism that NYPD sometimes gets in handling LGBTQ cases of domestic violence.
That it could be a newer officer, that this is something that he or she is unfamiliar with, but we do try to train, and there's never enough training, and we're consistent on always, again, reiterating and doing the roll call training and then the specialized training.
Tim says he has a lot of respect for the NYPD, but he thinks it's hard for some officers to understand domestic violence between two men. In the end, Tim got help. He got an order of protection and took his case to family court. But when it came down to it, he had to leave his apartment and relocate to feel safe. Tim offers some advice for anyone who may be going through what he did.
Do not ignore your instincts, because my instincts, I didn't have red flags wave. I had a flagpole hitting me in the head, but I ignored all these signs, the warning signs of somebody telling you about these violent relationships. And if your instincts tell you to change the locks, don't change them back. Yeah, all that stuff I understand now in hindsight, but I certainly didn't get it in real time, did I?
Tim says he feels safe in his new home. He's now going to counseling, which he says is helping a lot. For Cityscape, I'm Andrea McCrary.